Today we're going to talk about maintaining your planted tank. Specifically, we're going to be talking about algae growth. This is a tank here, my 29 gallon, that grows a lot of algae. We're going to talk about why I think it grows a lot of algae as opposed to, say, my 40 breeder that does not hardly grow any algae. And we're going to dispel some of the myths about how to take care of algae, and I'm going to show you how I take care of it and get you to a point to where you can have a good looking aquarium without dumping a bunch of products in or buying a bunch of fish until you find that balance in your tank, which is the step that a lot of people ignore. So anyway, that's it. We're going to get started. I'm going to give you a tour of the tank, show you what's going on with the tank, what's in the tank. I'll talk about why I think it grows algae, and then we'll get started maintaining this tank as well. I'm Honest, and this is my aquarium. So this is my 29 gallon aquarium, one of them anyway. I'm going to give you a quick tour so you can see what I've got going on in here. I've got a Nicrew light. Now this light is actually the wrong size. This is for a 20 gallon. Similar to my 40 breeder, I've created these little bars that I just made out of little curtain rods to perch this light on. These Nicrew lights are really good, but they're not very sturdy out here if you try to extend them out far. So I do this just to keep it nice and stable. The cat can walk on it if he wants. But let's see, I've got duckweed that I've started in here. It's kind of hard to see because of the light here, but we got duckweed going in here. When I got this hygrophila that's way overgrown, that I will do a video about eventually, it came with snails and duckweed on accident. So now I have pond snails, which I had wanted to put in here anyway. I had wanted to put some pond snails in here from the beginning, but I just ended up getting them for free. And I also wanted duckweed, so it worked out just great. Anyway, on to what we're talking about. This tank grows a ton of algae. So let's talk about what I have in this tank. I have 4 prey cox rainbows in here. Let me dump some food in and see if I can get them to turn on a little bit. They're scared of the camera. But then I've also got these rocks that I got actually in a local creek. They're not really safe rocks. We'll talk about that another time. They are sedimentary instead of igneous, so they actually release some stuff into the water. And then I have this Hygrophila coriambosa, the giant hygro, and some jungle val, and one little crypt back there in the back, and then a Java fern over here. So in this tank, there are a lot of surfaces for algae to grow on. And ever since this tank started growing brown algae, which is one of the beginning stages of cycling the tank, or a sign that it's cycled, it has just nonstop grown algae on these rocks. Now I'm going to tell you why. There are not enough plants in this aquarium that grow quickly to outcompete this algae. So there are too much light and nutrients for these plants to utilize successfully, so the excess grows algae. This is what, I've cleaned the glass a little bit just so I could get these shots, but if you look at the back, you'll see it's growing tons of algae. So most of the videos out there that you see talk about balancing your tank, and they tell you all these different ways of adding fish and all this. People will say, get some snails, get some plecos. And if you like snails, then get some snails. If you like plecos, then get some plecos. But plecos and snails are not going to address an algae problem like this. If you put plecos and snails in this aquarium and autocats, and you could fill this aquarium with algae eating creatures, and they are most likely not going to be able to take care of all this algae. And this is going to be the case in most people's planted tanks. Now, if you look at my 40 breeder, look how high the plant load is in this aquarium. There is so many plants in there. And, you know, like the wisteria here and the hygrophila in the back and the ludwigia are all three very fast growing plants. The faster the plants grow, the more nutrients they're uptaking out of the water column. And so the less chance there is for algae to grow. Now, if you look at these rocks over here, you know, I have not been scrubbing these rocks, and I have not had to scrub the glass all the time. It does grow a little hair algae. You may be able to see that it's grown some in the moss, and it grows some in the ludwigia. But as far as green algae, brown algae, cyano, it's not growing anything. Now, I have several thoughts about why, and I don't think it's just the plants. I have a UV sterilizer running, and I have carbon in the filter. And although people will tell you not to run carbon in a planted tank, that's one of those myths out there that I think, I mean, this tank has a really high plant load. So you would think, based on what people say about carbon removing nutrients from the water column, that these plants would be struggling, but they're not. They're doing great. And that's no CO2, no. You know, I use a little bit of Thrive, this stuff here. I use a little bit of this stuff. And I don't use it as much as as it says on the label. Anyway, back to this tank. This tank, however, grows a bunch of algae. There are differences between the two tanks. This one has no UV sterilizer. It does not run a canister filter. It has just a sponge filter, and it has a AquaClear 30 that I'm not running carbon in currently. And so that's part of why it's growing algae. Now, this is the part most of you are not going to like to hear. You have to get your sleeves wet. You have to get your sleeves wet to take care of your algae. That's all there is to it. If you have a tank that grows algae like this tank here grows algae, you have to get your hands in there and get rid of that algae. I mean, that's just how it works. And I see in the Facebook groups and stuff, I actually saw a guy in a Facebook group yesterday or day before make a post that said, how to keep crystal clear glass with no physical labor. What? You don't. That's magic. That's how you do that. So what we do is we clean it off with brushes, with your gravel vac. We clean it off. That's how we do this. Now, that's not to say that you don't want to listen to the advice of some of these people about how to balance your tank. You still want to try to strive for an algae-free tank. But most of us are not going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to accomplish that goal very easily. And in the meantime, the way to fix it is manual removal. Manual removal is the key. That's why I chose the tagline for this channel, get your sleeves wet, because that's what we're going to be doing. So I couldn't get the fish going. We'll do that some other time in another video. But for today, we're going to actually maintain this on camera. I'm going to show you exactly how I do it, show you the end result, and hopefully you'll take my advice, get your sleeves wet, and get rid of your algae. So here we go. All right, let's get our sleeves wet. So, like I said, the key to really maintaining an algae filled tank like this is manual removal. So the first thing when you maintain your tank to remember is not to do your water change right off the bat. You want to do your water change last. Now in a tank like this with this much algae, brushes. Man, this toothbrush is the best. I bought a bigger brush and it's really just too much. I like this little toothbrush. Now you see there's not a lot of algae growing right in this area. I had a rock sitting here to grow some algae for my plecos, so it kind of blocked the light for this portion. But for the other, we're going to use this toothbrush and we're just going to clean it up. I mean, it's not really that difficult, and you know, you don't have to get it all. You just want to release a good portion of it into the water column. And the green algae is pretty easy. The brown diatom algae that you'll get in the beginning is pretty easy to get off. Now this darker colored cyano is harder to deal with. It's what we call the blue-green algae. I believe that's what this is anyway. And as I understand it, it's not really an algae, it's a bacteria. And so they say that if you treat your tank with erythromycin, which is an antibacterial from API, that it will get rid of this cyano. I haven't tried that myself. But, you know, when you maintain your tank, don't think of it as work. I think that's the problem, is that too many people are like, oh, I want to have an aquarium without doing any work. But, you know, you have a dog, you bathe your dog, you feed the dog, you know, and why should it be any different with fish? You know, once a week, once every 2 weeks, to go through and do this, and you know, make it a ritual for yourself. I mean, usually I can't do it now because of YouTube's, you know, copyright policies and whatever, but usually I'll throw on some Pink Floyd or some Led Zeppelin, and it's relaxing. You know, you use it as a time to interface with your tank and, you know, look at your fish really closely, you know, during the maintenance process beforehand, and check for any problems with them. And, you know, you should use it as relaxation and not think of it as this horrible thing that you have to do because you have fish tanks. And I think that's why people so often make posts and stuff in forums and Facebook groups. Like, what fish do I buy to get rid of algae? Or, you know, what product can I dump into my tank to get rid of algae? And, you know, the answer is you need to have a sufficient plant load if you want to, you know, be fairly maintenance free or light on the maintenance. You need to have a high enough plant load that you're using up the nutrients in your tank. That the nutrients, there are not a bunch of extra nutrients left over in your tank for the algae to feed on. Now, you know, this tank right here is kind of labor intensive when it comes to cleaning, because I just have so many surfaces for the algae to grow on. And see, the reason we didn't do the water change is because you see all of this algae that we're kicking up into the water column, and we don't want that to just settle back on everything and start to grow again. And you also notice that I'm not really getting all the algae. I'm not obsessive about not having any algae in the tank. Algae is, you know, it's there for a reason. It grows because there's excess nutrients in your tank. You know, it'd be nice if we could all get to a spot to where we didn't have to fight algae, but most of us never do. So don't give up. Just make a ritual out of keeping your tank maintained. You know, do it once a week. Sometimes you can do it once every 2 weeks, depending on your tank. I let this one go a little longer than I normally have been, simply because I wanted to do this video, and I want to really stress real aquarium maintenance. Brushes and hoses, elbow grease, There's a reason why I chose the slogan for this channel, get your sleeves wet. Because everybody else, well, not everybody, but a lot of other people want to tell you, buy a pleco, buy a snail. I probably got 20 snails in here, and although they're not like super cleaners, they definitely eat some of the algae, but not enough. And chances are, in your tank, whatever you get, a pleco, snails, is not going to be enough. And if it's not enough, then you've got this extra fish load of fish that you may not really have even wanted. Say you want to keep Bosemani rainbows, and you put, you start out with 3 or 4 Bosemani rainbows and you put them in this tank. Then all of a sudden you've got algae growing, and you're like, oh, how do I get rid of algae? And everybody says, go buy some plecos, go buy some autocinquas, go buy some snails. So you go do all these things. Number one, they're probably not going to eat all your algae, in most cases. And number two, now you've got these extra fish. You were planning on putting just, as an example, you were planning on putting 8 Bosemani rainbows in there. But now you've just put 3 autocinquas, a pleco, 3 snails, and you've increased the amount of waste being produced by the creatures in your tank. And so that means less room for fish that you wanted to put in your aquarium. And like I said in the other part, if you like plecos, get plecos. If you like snails, then get snails. But I don't really recommend going and buying a bunch of fish to try to fight your algae problem. What I would recommend that you go buy is plants. Like I said, the more plants you have, the more nutrients they're pulling out, and the less nutrients there are for algae to thrive. So if you can outcompete the algae with plants, then that's how you can, that's one way that you can begin to balance your tank. Figure out how many plants you need. And also, be wary of what plants you get, because not all plants take up very many nutrients. I mean, for instance, in this tank, the jungle fowl and the java fern, they just don't really grow very fast. And so what that really means is that because they don't grow very fast, they're not taking very many nutrients out of the water. And if the goal with plants is to fight the algae, then having slow growing plants just takes up room in your aquarium that you could be putting fast growing plants in there that actually will suck a bunch out of your aquarium. And you see, some of this is hard to get off. And I don't mind leaving some of it. I kind of think it makes it look natural. And plus that algae, like I said, it's there for a purpose. It's there because you've got all these excesses in your aquarium, and it's using those up. And you want that. You want to pull that nitrate and everything out, and they do eat that just like plants do. They are a plant. You can see some of it comes off really well. Some of it doesn't. This black and blue-green type stuff is a lot harder to get off. But you can see it hasn't taken very long for me to clean this up. It's really not that much work. It's kind of relaxing. I mean, you don't go nuts and wear yourself out doing it. Just take your time, listen to some music, and put a little work into it. So already you can see this tank really shaping up. So with this toothbrush, I also like to go get the stuff that's down close to the bottom. It's just kind of easier to scrape the bottom of the glass with the toothbrush. So I do it that way. Let's see. let you get down in closer to the gravel and kind of get that edge. See that jungle valve? I hate the jungle valve. I mean, I might like it if it ever actually gets going, but so far it hasn't for me. Okay, so I'll get the bottom like that. And then I like to use an extra aqua clear sponge to work on this hard water stuff up here. It takes it off pretty well. It's kind of scratchy, but it doesn't scratch the glass. And I have this long scrubby thing here, but it just doesn't seem to do a very good job on the hard water deposits. And these aqua clear sponges do really well. And then you can use that on the glass as well. And it does work pretty well for just this regular old green algae. Some things may be tougher to get off, and when they are, I might try that pole and push real hard, or I also have a razor scraper, just a regular cheap little craft razor scraper from the craft store or whatever, and that works for the harder stuff to get off. So normally, like I said, I would have some music going. I'm going to pause it so this doesn't get too long, and I'm going to do the rest of the glass, and then we'll come back. All right, so we're back. I worked on the glass with the aqua clear sponge and some with the wand to get in the tighter spots. And now we're going to start a siphon. No need to suck on the hose. And well, we've got a bunch of duckweed in there. We're just going to let it roll. So now that we've got all this stuff stirred up into the water column, now we do our water change. You know, we've got stuff that's settled down, and there's stuff that is on the in the gravel. And we're going to do some gravel vac. The way I like to do the gravel vacuuming is I keep my finger over the end of the hose like this, and then I just kind of let it off and suck some up, and then I put my finger over it and let the gravel fall back out, and I just kind of keep cycling it like that. And the nasty stuff is lighter, so it goes to the top pretty quickly, whereas the rocks do not. So that's how I vacuum my gravel. Just kind of go through there and get a bunch of it and lay it back down where it looks fairly good. I don't really have to do too much in here because I've got a small fish load. But I work from the bottom. I try to get stuff that's settled onto the bottom first. Stuff that's underneath these rocks. We're going to do a significant water change after we do a cleaning like this on a really dirty aquarium, because there's a lot of algae and trash in this water column. And that's another thing. You see how I'm like, I don't know if you can see the particles, but I'm chasing things that I see in here and sucking them up into the hose in order to try to get just as much of the larger stuff out as I can. And like there was some staghorn on some of this, on some of these rocks, which actually I didn't show you how I deal with the staghorn, so I'm gonna, once I fill this bucket, then I'll do some of that and show you how to deal with the more hair type algae. I do sometimes use some hydrogen peroxide, like in things like moss, or in plants that you can't really just yank the hair algae out of. I will put it in a little syringe and use it that way. A lot of videos out there on that. I'm sure I will eventually produce my own, but we're not doing that today. So I do sometimes use products or things to get rid of algae, as well as the manual removal. So it's always a multi-pronged attack. You're trying to get your balance of your tank and everything. You're trying to fight algae any way you can, but I think the important thing not to lose sight of is that manual removal and actual tank maintenance, like I'm showing you today, is a constant in all that. So all of these guys who are telling you what fish to get and everything like that, they're neglecting to mention the fact that if they have a nice aquarium, they're also doing what I'm showing you here. They are working to maintain the algae on top of the other things that they're doing, even in tanks that don't grow very much algae. So I'm going to stop here with this. I like to tilt this up and then dump it into the bucket. We'll try to get those leaves and everything out of that. And then I'll scoop the little pieces of duckweed out before I start again. But I want to show you real quick about this staghorn algae. If you can see it on this jungle valve here. You can find one with quite a bit on it. I can show you. See, here's some here sticking out, little pieces of hair algae. Some back here as well. I'm just going to take and I'm just going to run my finger down it and pull it right off and throw it into the bucket. I hope I can get water on the camera there. So I'll go through. Oh, that one was weak. But you do have to be careful, especially if your plants are not super healthy, like this jungle valve is kind of weak. But you can strip it right off like that on some plants. Now, I'm not going to do any more right now. I may pull some more off once I get it filled back up. But that's how I deal with the staghorn algae, and that's how I deal with all these algae. I'm going to pause it again, and we'll come back after I've done the water change and see how it looks. So now that I have the water refilling, I use Seachem Safe, and I like to dissolve it in some water first, and I fill it right in to deal with the chlorine and chloramine in my tap water. Probably got a filter full of duckweed. I already had to clean the stem out. I'm new to this duckweed thing, so it's going to take me a while to get that sorted out. So I did about a 60% water change. Sometimes I'll do more. It's depending on how much stuff I'm pulling out. If maybe I decided to test that time. Depending on what the water parameters were. I have my tank rigged so that I can fill it direct from the sink. We have this long extendable thing, and I have my tanks right here on the other side of this bar, so I'm able to fill everything from the sink. I have to kind of do a little rig up that I made that I'll do a video on at some point for my 40 breeder, but I do fill everything straight from the sink. That allows me to just, have temperature control and just makes it easy. So I'll come back when it's filled up and show you the end result. I'm going to give it a little while for the water to clear out and stuff, and then I'll come back and we'll take a look at what we've done. So here's the result. Clearly still a little bit of algae. I haven't gotten it all. Like I said, I did let it go further than I normally do. I haven't gotten all the staghorn. There's still some on the crypt, and there's some here and there. But overall, I mean, the difference is night and day if you go back and look at what it looked like when we started. If there's one thing that I can impress upon you from this channel and this video, is to get your sleeves wet. Don't be scared to get into the aquarium. Do maintenance. Do real maintenance on the aquarium, not just water changes. Don't just dump a bunch of crap in your tank to try to get rid of algae. And I wouldn't recommend going and buying a bunch of new animals for the tank either. Just do your maintenance. Make a habit of it. Listen to some music, relax. Do whatever it is you do to relax. Drink some beers or whatever. And just do real maintenance on your tank. That's all it takes to maintain a decent aquarium. So my Crebensis is showing himself a bit. He is Satan incarnate. I'm actually considering moving these guys out of here because he's constantly chasing them. Or getting rid of him, which is also a possibility. But do your maintenance, guys. Get your sleeves wet. Get your sleeves wet. Peace.